I spent 2 days preparing a $400 prime standing rib roast for our family Sunday dinner. As I set the perfectly rested meat on the grand oak table, my mother pushed her pristine plate away. "We should really just order takeout next time," she announced to the entire room, her voice dripping with disdain. "At least takeout would be edible." My father chuckled, a low, enabling sound that grated against my nerves. I looked around the room, making eye contact with everyone present, but not a single person spoke up to defend me. I simply untied my apron, packed up my belongings, and told them that next time, they could all pay for their own takeout, because I was officially done. They laughed at what they called my dramatic exit, but the financial shockwave I unleashed from my car 5 minutes later wiped those smug smiles off their faces permanently. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members who demanded your sacrifice but mocked your success. Now, let me take you back to that suffocating dining room. I am Maya, 35 years old, and for the last decade, I have been the invisible workhorse of my family. I stood at the head of the table in my childhood home, my hands still holding the silver carving fork, the aroma of garlic, fresh rosemary, and perfectly rendered beef fat filling the room. Cooking is not just a hobby for me, it is my life. But to my mother Brenda, I was just the disappointment who spent her days sweating over a hot stove instead of sitting in a corner office. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady, "the roast has been temperature controlled for 48 hours. It is exactly medium rare." Brenda rolled her eyes and picked up her wine glass. "It looks raw, Maya, and frankly, the sides are uninspired. You would think someone who works in a kitchen all day would learn a thing or two about presentation, but I suppose a diner does not teach you much about elegance." My father Calvin snorted from the other end of the table. "Now, Brenda, do not be too hard on her. She tries her best with what she knows." I felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in my stomach. They had no idea what I actually knew. They never bothered to ask. To them, I was just a line cook flipping burgers at some greasy spoon. They did not know that I was actually an elite, highly sought-after private executive chef for high-net-worth clients across the country. They did not know that the knives I had used to prep their dinner cost more than their cars. That was when Connor decided to chime in. Connor is my 34-year-old white brother-in-law, married to my younger sister, Chloe. He is the kind of man who wears a suit to a family barbecue and thinks reading one article on investing makes him a financial guru. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of expensive red wine that I had brought, and gave me a patronizing smile. "Come on, Maya," Connor said, his tone thick with condescension. "You cannot expect to understand refined palates when you just sweat in a kitchen all day. Leave the fine dining to Chloe and me. We actually know what quality tastes like." I shifted my gaze to my sister Chloe. At 32, she was the undeniable golden child of the family. She was currently trying to launch what she called a luxury lifestyle brand, a vanity project funded entirely by Connor and whatever money she could gilt out of our parents. She had absolutely no business sense, but to our mother and father, she was a visionary. Chloe did not say a word to defend me. She simply smirked, took a delicate sip of her water, and adjusted her diamond earrings. The sheer audacity of Connor sitting there, enjoying the wine I purchased, in the house I was secretly keeping afloat, while delivering a racially tinged, classist insult about my supposed lack of refinement, was the exact moment something inside me snapped. It was not a loud, chaotic snap. It was a cold, precise, and permanent fracture. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not try to explain to Connor that my weekly grocery budget for a single client was double his monthly salary. I simply set the silver carving fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. I reached behind my back and untied the knot of my apron. The silence in the room began to shift, a faint ripple of confusion replacing the smug superiority. I folded the apron neatly and placed it over the back of my chair. Then I walked over to the kitchen counter and unrolled my leather knife bag. The soft shing of custom Japanese steel sliding into leather sheaths was the only sound in the room. I worked meticulously, respecting my tools, ignoring the bewildered stares burning into my back. Maya, what on earth are you doing? Brenda demanded, her tone shifting from mocking to annoyed. Sit down and serve the food. We are hungry. I zipped my leather bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back to the doorway of the dining room. I looked at the feast I had prepared. The glazed carrots, the truffle mashed potatoes, the perfectly crusted roast. Then I looked at the people waiting to devour my hard work, while simultaneously spitting on my dignity. I am leaving, I said, my voice eerily calm. Enjoy the inedible food. And next time you want a Sunday dinner, you can all pay for your own takeout, because I am officially done. Chloe scoffed loudly. Oh, please, Maya, stop being so dramatic. You always ruin family time with your sensitivity. Connor chuckled again, shaking his head as if I were a petulant child. Let her go, Chloe. She will be back tomorrow to clean the kitchen. She always is. I did not offer a rebuttal. I turned on my heel, walked down the hallway, and stepped out the front door. The cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in my 35 years, I took a deep breath that did not feel heavy with family guilt. I heard the front door open behind me as I reached my car. Calvin stood on the porch, his hands on his hips. Maya, get back inside right now, he barked, using that stern, fatherly voice that used to terrify me when I was a teenager. You are tearing this family apart over a simple joke. Your sister is stressed about her new business. Be the bigger person and come eat your dinner. I opened my car door, tossed my knife bag onto the passenger seat, and looked at the man who had enabled my emotional abuse for decades. I am the bigger person, Dad, I said quietly. That is why I am leaving instead of telling you what I really think. I got into the driver's seat, shut the door, and locked it. As I pulled out of the driveway, I watched him in the rearview mirror, shaking his head in disgust before retreating into the house. I drove for about 3 blocks before pulling over into an empty grocery store parking lot. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart rate was completely normal. I was not operating out of anger anymore. I was operating out of absolute clarity. Right on cue, my phone buzzed in the center console. It was an automated banking alert, a reminder for an upcoming scheduled transfer. I stared at the screen, and a dark, triumphant smile slowly spread across my face. My family thought they were sitting in their house. They thought Brenda and Calvin owned that beautiful brick colonial with the wraparound porch and the mature oak trees. They loved to host parties there, parading their success in front of their church friends and neighbors. What none of them knew, not even Chloe or the supposed financial genius Connor, was that my parents had quietly gone into foreclosure 5 years ago. Calvin had made some terrible investments, and Brenda had refused to curb her lavish spending habits. To save them from public humiliation, I had stepped in. I had used the substantial income from my private chef business to buy the house outright from the bank. I kept it a secret to protect my father and his fragile pride. I let them continue to act like the lords of the manor, while I quietly paid the massive mortgage every single month. I picked up my phone and opened my secure banking application. I navigated to the recurring payments section. There it was. The automatic monthly transfer of $3,500, scheduled to clear their mortgage account the day after tomorrow. They did not need me. They had refined palates. They had Connor and his business loans. They had Chloe and her luxury lifestyle brand. I tapped the scheduled payment. The screen prompted me with a warning. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? I hit confirm. The payment vanished from the screen. A massive burden lifted from my shoulders in an instant. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road, heading toward my own luxury apartment in the city. The table had been set, the main course had been served, and my family was about to choke on the reality of their own arrogance. I woke up Monday morning in my own apartment, the early sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. For the first time in years, I did not start my week dreading a barrage of demands from my family. I brewed a pot of fresh Ethiopian coffee, enjoying the absolute quiet of my kitchen. My phone started vibrating against the granite countertop at exactly 7:30. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. It was Brenda. I let the call go to voicemail twice before finally answering, setting the phone on speaker while I prepared my breakfast. "Maya, where are you?" my mother demanded. Her voice was sharp and laced with the usual entitlement. "The dining room is a complete disaster. There are plates everywhere and the kitchen counters are covered in grease. You need to get over here and clean this mess up right now." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I am at home, Mom," I replied calmly, "and I will not be coming over. I cooked the meal. Cleaning up is the least you all can do." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You do not speak to me that way," she snapped. "We let you host family dinner here out of the goodness of our hearts so you could feel included. Now stop acting like a spoiled brat and get over here." Before I could respond, the phone shuffled and Calvin took over. He always played the peacekeeper, but his version of peace just meant forcing me to swallow disrespect to keep Brenda happy. "Maya, listen to me," my father said, using his deep, authoritative voice. "You are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding. Chloe is incredibly stressed about her new business launch right now. Connor is working around the clock. We do not need this kind of hostility in the house. Be the bigger person, come apologize to your mother, and clean the kitchen so we can move past this." I stared out the window at the city below. "I am not tearing anything apart, Dad," I said quietly. "You are just upset because the person you usually step on finally moved out of the way. Have fun scrubbing the roasting pan." I ended the call and blocked both of their numbers for the rest of the week. The gaslighting was so predictable it was almost boring. They honestly believed I would come crawling back, begging for their approval. They had no idea the financial guillotine I had already set in motion. By Thursday afternoon, the second phase of my plan naturally unfolded. I was at my culinary headquarters, overseeing a complex menu tasting for a high-profile corporate client, when my personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an automated fraud alert from my bank. Years ago, when I first started making real money, I opened a high-limit platinum credit card and gave it to my parents. I told them it was strictly for medical emergencies or household repairs, since they were supposedly living on a fixed income. But over the past few months, I had noticed the charges getting increasingly questionable. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. A charge for $15,000 had just been attempted at a luxury Italian furniture boutique downtown. It was immediately declined. 30 seconds later, a second alert popped up. They had tried running the card again, this time for $14,000. Declined again. A minute passed. Then came a third attempt for a miserable $500. Declined. I could vividly picture the scene. Chloe and Connor, dressed in their designer clothes, standing at the polished counter of that high-end boutique. Connor trying to buy imported leather desks for Chloe's fake lifestyle brand, acting like a wealthy CEO. He probably handed the clerk my card with that smug, entitled grin of his, only to watch it turn into bright red humiliation as a line of wealthy customers formed behind them. I smiled, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and went back to my tasting. It did not take long for the fallout to reach my doorstep. Barely 2 hours later, the heavy knocking started at my apartment door. I checked the security camera. It was Chloe. Her flawless blowout was slightly frizzy, and her face was twisted in absolute fury. I opened the door and leaned casually against the frame. "Hello, Chloe? Do not play games with me," she screamed, pushing past me into my entryway. She stopped dead in her tracks, looking around my massive, professionally decorated living room for a second, clearly caught off guard by the luxury she did not know I lived in. But she quickly recovered her rage. "Why is the family emergency card shut off?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Connor and I were at the design center. We had our entire office suite picked out, and the card declined 3 times in front of the owner. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" I crossed my arms. I imagine it was very embarrassing to realize you cannot afford your own furniture. But as I recall, Mom said I should stop buying groceries and just pay for takeout. Takeout is not cheap, Chloe. I had to cut unnecessary expenses, like funding your fake business. You vindictive witch, she hissed. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me because I'm actually building something elegant while you smell like onions and bleach all day. You did this to ruin my launch party. I am not jealous of a business that generates zero revenue, I replied evenly. And that card was for Mom and Dad's emergencies, not your office decor. Chloe sneered, flipping her hair over her shoulder. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute triumph. Fine, she spat. Keep your pathetic little waitress tips. We do not need your credit card anyway. Connor just got off the phone with the bank. He got a massive commercial business loan approved this morning. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious about how an unemployed man secured a massive commercial loan. Oh, really? And what collateral did he possibly use for that? Mom and Dad's house, obviously, Chloe said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. They co-signed for us. The equity in that house is worth over $800,000. So you can keep your little plastic card, Maya. We are about to be completely funded. We do not need you. We never did. She turned around and stormed out of my apartment, slamming the heavy door behind her so hard the walls shook. I stood in the entryway for a long time. I did not feel angry. I felt a cold, calculating thrill wash over my entire body. Chloe thought she had just delivered a devastating blow. She thought they had bypassed me and tapped into the family fortune. I walked slowly into my home office, unlocked my heavy steel floor safe, and pulled out a thick manila folder. I opened it and ran my fingers over the official county property deed. It was stamped, notarized, and legally binding. They had applied for a loan using the house as collateral. A house that my parents did not own. A house whose deed was sitting right here, legally and entirely in my name. The bank's title search was going to be completed in less than 24 hours. And when it did, my family was going to experience a level of devastation they could not even begin to comprehend. I did not have to wait long for their next move. By noon the following day, the panic must have truly set in. I was in the middle of a high-stakes tasting menu rehearsal for a major celebrity client at my private culinary estate. My phone buzzed with an old, forgotten notification. Years ago, my mother Brenda had forced everyone in the family to download a location tracking application. She claimed it was for our safety, but in reality it was just another tool for her to control us. I had completely forgotten the app was even still active on my phone until I saw the alert pop up, notifying me that Chloe was actively viewing my location. They were coming for me. They thought they were going to pull up to some grease-stained, run-down local diner. They probably planned to barge in, cause a massive scene, and scream at me in front of my shift manager. They wanted to publicly humiliate me into turning the credit cards back on and force me to sign whatever paperwork Connor needed to save his doomed commercial loan. Instead, their GPS led them out of the city and straight to the wrought iron security gates of the Crown Culinary Estate. It is a sprawling $12 million facility I purchased 2 years ago to serve as the headquarters for my private executive catering empire. I was standing at the head of a massive stainless steel prep table when I heard the commotion echoing down the marble hallway. I was wearing a pristine, custom-tailored white executive chef coat with my name embroidered in gold silk across the chest. 4 of my highly trained sous chefs were standing beside me, delicately plating portions of butter, poached lobster, and Wagyu beef. The double mahogany doors of the tasting room flew open. They pushed past my completely bewildered receptionist and stormed inside. Chloe entered first, followed by Connor, with Brenda and Calvin trailing close behind. They all stopped dead in their tracks. The anger on their faces instantly morphed into profound confusion. They stared at the vaulted ceilings, the crystal chandeliers, and the sheer scale of the professional kitchen. Connor recovered first. Desperation makes people do incredibly stupid things. He marched up to my prep table, his face flushed red and sweating profusely. He slammed a crumpled piece of paper down on the polished metal, nearly knocking over a crystal water glass. It was a quit-claim deed. "Sign this right now, Maya," Connor demanded, puffing out his chest and trying to project a commanding presence. "You are holding up my commercial loan with your petty financial games. I need you to release whatever minor legal claim you think you have on your parents' property, so the bank will clear my funds. We do not have time for this nonsense today." Before I could even speak, Tyson, my head of private security, stepped smoothly out of the shadows near the doorway. Tyson is 6'4", built like a freight train, and was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. He placed a very heavy, very firm hand on Connor's shoulder. "Step back from the table, sir," Tyson said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a deep, menacing threat that made Connor physically flinch and step away from me. I did not break eye contact with my entitled brother-in-law. I wiped my hands on a clean towel and looked down at the paper he had slammed on my table. "I do not have a minor legal claim, Connor," I said evenly, letting my voice carry across the silent room. "I own the property outright. I bought it out of foreclosure 5 years ago because my father made terrible investments and my mother refused to stop spending money they did not have. And I certainly will not be signing a quit-claim deed to fund a fake luxury lifestyle brand that cannot even afford to buy its own office chairs." Chloe gasped, her eyes darting frantically around the room, taking in the undeniable proof of my wealth. "You own it," she whispered, the color draining from her perfect face. "That is impossible. You just cook food." That was when my mother lost whatever tiny shred of sanity she had left. Being exposed in front of strangers was Brenda's ultimate nightmare. She pushed past Connor, her face contorted in absolute, unhinged rage. "I am your mother," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the walls, completely ignoring the 5 other professionals staring at her. "That house is in my name. I raised you in that house. I am the matriarch of this family. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will forge your signature myself and have you thrown out on the street." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic hum of the industrial refrigerators. From the corner of the room, Evelyn, my corporate attorney, slowly closed her leather portfolio. She had been sitting quietly on a velvet sofa, reviewing client contracts for the upcoming gala. Evelyn stood up, adjusted her designer glasses, and walked calmly toward my family. "I highly advise against confessing to intended real estate fraud and forgery in front of 6 witnesses, ma'am," Evelyn said with chilling professional politeness, "especially since I have already filed the formal eviction notice with the county court this morning." My father Calvin, who had quietly hovered near the door this entire time, suddenly grabbed his chest as if he had been physically struck. "Eviction," Calvin stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "Maya, what is she talking about? You cannot evict us. We are your parents." I looked at the man who had sat at the head of the table just a few nights ago, laughing while Connor insulted my entire existence. I looked at the mother who called my hard work inedible. I looked at the sister who thought she was better than me, and the brother-in-law who tried to steal from me. "I am talking about consequences, Dad," I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You wanted me to pay for takeout. I am just cutting my expenses. Now I have a very important client arriving in exactly 10 minutes, and all of you are trespassing on private property." I turned my attention to my head of security. "Tyson, please escort these people off my estate. If they refuse to leave quietly, or if they ever show up here again, call the police and press charges for trespassing." Connor tried to open his mouth to argue, but Tyson took one step forward, and the fight completely left him. Chloe grabbed her husband's arm, pulling him toward the door. Brenda was hyperventilating, muttering under her breath as Calvin gently guided her out of the tasting room. They walked back down the marble hallway, stripped of their pride, their false wealth, and their illusion of control. I turned back to my sous chefs, picked up my tweezers, and carefully placed a microgreen on top of the lobster. "Let us plate the next course," I said. The very next morning, the reality of my ownership finally caught up with Connor and his delusions of grandeur. I was reviewing inventory sheets in my office when my attorney, Evelyn, called me with an update. Connor's bank had officially permanently denied his commercial loan. The underwriters had completed their title search on my parents' property and discovered what I had known for 5 years. My family owned absolutely nothing. The equity Connor had promised the bank did not exist. Instead of recognizing that I had put a roof over their heads and saved them from public bankruptcy half a decade ago, my parents decided to go on the offensive. By noon, my phone was flooded with angry text messages from extended family members and women from my parents' church. Brenda had taken to Facebook. She posted a long, tearful video from her living room, claiming that I was an abusive, money-hungry daughter who had somehow manipulated them into signing away their family legacy. She painted herself as a fragile victim, and me as a calculating monster who was trying to leave her own flesh and blood homeless. I did not reply to a single comment. I did not post a rebuttal video. When you know you hold all the cards, you do not need to argue with people who are playing checkers. I simply sent a text to Evelyn, giving her the green light to proceed with the next phase. At exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, Brenda was hosting her weekly church auxiliary tea party in her living room. She had invited 6 of the most prominent gossips in the congregation, undoubtedly to continue her smear campaign against me in person. I know this because the process server Evelyn hired wore a discreet body camera for his own protection, and I reviewed the footage later. The server knocked on the heavy oak front door. Brenda answered it, wearing her finest pearl necklace, holding a teacup, and dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The server asked for Brenda and Calvin by name. When she confirmed her identity, he handed her a thick manila envelope right in front of the entire church group. It was the formal, legally binding 30-day notice of eviction. The video showed the exact moment Brenda pulled the document out of the envelope, read the bold print at the top, and let her teacup shatter on the hardwood floor. With their public image crumbling and the threat of homelessness now an unavoidable legal reality, the family descended into sheer desperation. Connor and Chloe had borrowed heavily from a predatory lender to fund the initial deposits for her luxury lifestyle brand launch party, assuming the bank loan would clear and cover their debts. Now, they were on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars with no way to pay it back. Desperate people do not think clearly. They convinced themselves that I must have forged the original foreclosure buyout documents. They believed that if they could just get into my office and find my physical files, they could uncover the fake paperwork and use it to blackmail me into giving them the house. 2 nights later, I was at my apartment enjoying a quiet evening with a glass of wine and a good book. At exactly 2 in the morning, my phone screen illuminated the dark room. It was an urgent push notification from my corporate security system. A silent alarm had been triggered in the administrative wing of the Crown Culinary Estate. I immediately set my wine glass down and opened the security application on my phone. The system fed live, crystal clear, 4K night vision footage directly to my screen. There, illuminated in the eerie green glow of the cameras, were my golden child sister and my entitled white brother-in-law. Connor was wearing a ridiculous black beanie, using a crowbar to pry open one of my locked filing cabinets. Chloe was standing by the door, frantically looking over her shoulder as a lookout. They were ransacking my corporate headquarters, committing a felony burglary, looking for evidence of a crime that did not exist. My heart pounded in my chest. My thumb hovered over the emergency button on the screen that would instantly dispatch the local police. It would be so easy. The cops would arrive in less than 5 minutes. They would be caught red-handed, arrested, and humiliated. But as I watched Connor aggressively tear through my confidential client folders, throwing my hard work onto the floor, a different plan took shape in my mind. Getting them arrested in the middle of the night was too quiet. It lacked the audience they so desperately craved. My family had spent my entire life trying to embarrass me in front of others. It was only fitting that their downfall happened on the biggest stage possible. I slowly pulled my thumb away from the dispatch button. Instead, I tapped the record icon. I watched the live feed for another 10 minutes as they grew increasingly frustrated, finding nothing but catering contracts and vendor invoices. When they finally gave up and slipped back out through the fire exit they had forced open, I downloaded the entire high-definition video file directly to an encrypted cloud server. I smiled in the dark living room. Chloe and Connor were still planning to host their massive grand launch party for her fake business at the end of the week. They had invited potential investors, local influencers, and every wealthy person they could find to a rented downtown loft, hoping to secure enough backing to pay off their predatory loans. They thought they had gotten away with the break-in. They thought they were still in the game. But as I uploaded the security footage to my presentation tablet, I knew the truth. They had just handed me the final ingredient for their absolute destruction. And I was going to serve it to them cold. I received the automated fraud alerts on my phone while I was in the middle of my tasting menu, but I did not just have to imagine what happened. I got the full glorious play-by-play later that evening from the boutique owner himself. Julian is a long-time catering client of mine, and he takes great pleasure in dealing with difficult people. Let me paint a picture of exactly what happened at that upscale Italian furniture store. Chloe and Connor walked into the boutique downtown, looking like they owned the entire city block. Chloe was wearing designer clothes she could not actually afford, and Connor was projecting the arrogant energy of a Fortune 500 chief executive officer. They did not just browse. They demanded the attention of the entire sales floor. For 2 straight hours, they tortured Julian and his staff. Chloe paraded around the showroom, turning her nose up at anything under $5,000. She demanded to see custom leather swatches, insisting she needed a very specific shade of imported ivory leather that matched what she called her brand aura. She spoke to the staff as if they were her personal servants, complaining that the complimentary espresso was too cold and the showroom lighting was unflattering. Finally, she settled on her grand prize, a massive, custom-built imported Italian leather desk with a matching executive chair for her supposedly booming lifestyle brand office. The total came out to just over $15,000. Connor stepped up to the polished glass checkout counter with that signature smug grin of his. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out my platinum credit card, the one explicitly designated for my parents' medical emergencies, and dropped it onto the glass with a dramatic thud. He did not even look at Julian. He just kept talking loudly to Chloe about the guest list for their upcoming launch party, making sure everyone in the store could hear how important they were. Julian picked up the card and inserted it into the terminal. He waited. The machine let out a loud, sharp beep, declined. Julian politely informed Connor that the transaction did not go through. Connor scoffed, rolling his eyes as if Julian had personally insulted his lineage. He told Julian to run it again, claiming it was a premium corporate account and the bank was probably just being overly cautious with such a large purchase because of his immense wealth. Julian ran it again. The machine beeped once more, declined. By this point, a line had started to form behind them. A well-known local real estate developer was waiting to pay for a sofa, and a prominent socialite was tapping her foot impatiently. The atmosphere in the boutique shifted from luxurious to incredibly tense. Connor began to sweat. The back of his neck flushed a deep, blotchy red. He snatched the card from Julian and aggressively wiped the chip on his sleeve, muttering under his breath about outdated retail technology and incompetent staff. He jammed the card back into the reader himself. Beep. Declined. The screen flashed a bright red message telling the merchant to contact the card issuer. Chloe stopped admiring her reflection in a nearby mirror and marched over to the counter. "What is the problem?" she snapped at Julian, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was practically hyperventilating. "Run the card manually. Do you know who we are?" Julian smiled his perfect retail-trained smile. He calmly explained that he could not bypass a hard decline from the banking institution. He then politely suggested that perhaps they had another form of payment to cover the $15,000 balance. Connor frantically opened his wallet and pulled out his own personal debit card. He handed it over, his hands visibly shaking now. Julian ran the debit card. Declined for insufficient funds. The real estate developer behind them let out a loud, heavy sigh and checked his luxury watch. The socialite whispered something to her friend and let out a soft laugh. Connor looked like he was going to be physically sick. The facade of the wealthy, successful business owner was completely shattered in front of the exact high society crowd. Chloe was so desperate to impress. Chloe was absolutely furious, but not at her husband. She slammed her manicured hands down on the glass counter and accused Julian of having faulty equipment. She yelled that they would be taking their business elsewhere and that her premium lifestyle brand would never feature his pathetic little store in their upcoming magazine spread. Julian simply nodded, wished them a wonderful afternoon, and called for the next customer in line. They practically ran out of the boutique, leaving their $15,000 dream desk sitting in the middle of the showroom. Connor was humiliated, stripped of his fake alpha male persona, while Chloe was vibrating with absolute rage. She did not blame her husband for being broke. She did not blame herself for trying to buy luxury furniture with money she did not earn. Instead, she pulled out her phone right there on the sidewalk and directed all of her toxic fury exactly where she always did. She prepared to dial my number, ready to blame me for her public humiliation. Chloe did not bother calling me. By the time she reached her car outside the furniture boutique, her anger had boiled over completely. She drove straight across town to my building. In the 5 years I had lived in my luxury high-rise, my sister had never once come to visit me. She never asked for my address to send a birthday card, and she certainly never dropped by just to see how I was doing. The only reason she was here now was because the bank had finally cut off her endless supply of free money. I was standing in my kitchen, reviewing vendor invoices for an upcoming celebrity gala, when the aggressive pounding on my front door echoed through the quiet hallway. My building has strict security protocols, complete with a 24-hour concierge, but Chloe has always believed rules do not apply to her. She had undoubtedly tailgated a resident through the lobby gate, riding the elevator up with zero regard for privacy, just to get to me. I set my tablet down on the granite counter and walked over to the entryway. I checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. There she was. Her designer handbag was slung hastily over her shoulder, and her usually flawless blowout was slightly disheveled from pacing back and forth in the corridor. She raised her fist to pound on the door again. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pulled the heavy door open. I did not invite her inside. I simply leaned against the doorframe, completely unfazed by her manic energy, and crossed my arms. "Hello, Chloe," I said calmly. She did not even say hello. She pushed her way forward, forcing me to hold my ground to keep her from entering my home. "Why is the family emergency card shut off?" she demanded, her voice echoing loudly enough for my neighbors to hear. Connor and I were at the design center downtown. We had our entire office suite picked out, and the card declined 3 times in front of the owner. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I looked at her, taking in her expensive outfit that I had indirectly paid for over the years. I imagine it was very embarrassing to realize you cannot afford your own furniture, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. Chloe let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. "You shut it off on purpose," she accused, her face flushing red with rage. "You did this to ruin my business launch. You have always been jealous of me. You sit in your little kitchen smelling like bleach and onions all day, and you just could not stand the thought of me building a real luxury brand. Turn the card back on right now." I looked her dead in the eye. I am not turning anything back on. As I recall, Mom announced to the entire family at dinner that I should stop buying groceries and just pay for takeout. Takeout is not cheap, Chloe. I had to cut unnecessary expenses, like funding your fake business. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly open in shock. She was so used to me backing down, so accustomed to our parents forcing me to apologize to keep the peace, that my absolute refusal simply did not compute in her brain. Her face went completely pale for a fraction of a second before twisting into an ugly sneer. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "You are a vindictive witch, Maya," she spat. "But you know what? Keep your pathetic little waitress tips. We do not need your credit card anyway." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious about how an unemployed man and a failed entrepreneur plan to pay for imported Italian leather. "Oh, really?" I asked softly. "And how exactly do you plan to fund this luxury brand of yours now?" Chloe smiled, a wicked, triumphant expression spreading across her face. "Connor just got off the phone with his bank," she said proudly, tilting her chin up. "He got a massive commercial business loan approved this morning. Mom and Dad co-signed for us. They used the house as collateral. The equity in that property is worth over $800,000, so you can keep your little plastic card. We are about to be completely funded. We never needed you, we never did." She turned on her heel and marched back down the carpeted hallway, her heels clicking loudly against the floorboards with every step. She did not look back. She thought she had just delivered a devastating blow. She thought she had bypassed my financial control, outsmarted me, and tapped directly into the family fortune. I stepped back inside and slowly closed the door, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying heavy click. I walked into my home office and looked at the heavy steel floor safe tucked beneath my mahogany desk. Inside that safe was a thick manila folder containing the official county property deed. It was stamped, notarized, and legally binding. They had applied for a commercial loan using the house as collateral, a house that my parents did not own, a house whose deed was sitting right here, legally and entirely in my name. The bank was going to finalize their title search by tomorrow morning, and when they did, the financial floor was going to completely collapse beneath my entire family, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the consequences of their own arrogance. After Chloe left my apartment, I went to sleep with the peaceful certainty that their financial house of cards was about to collapse. But my family has never been known for their patience. The bank told Connor the title search would take a few days to clear the underwriting department. Instead of waiting quietly for their magical business loan, Brenda, Chloe, and Connor decided they needed to punish me immediately for shutting off the credit card. My mother has always been a control freak. Years ago, she insisted we all download a family location sharing application on our phones. She claimed it was for our safety in case of emergencies. In reality, it was just another way for her to monitor our every move and complain if we were not where she expected us to be. I had muted the application years ago and completely forgotten it was still running in the background of my phone. But Brenda remembered. That Thursday afternoon, I was at my corporate headquarters. I was overseeing a highly confidential menu tasting for an upcoming gala hosted by a prominent celebrity client. Meanwhile, my family was piling into Connor's leased luxury sedan. Their plan was simple and cruel. They were going to track my phone, ambush me at whatever greasy spoon diner they assumed I worked at, and humiliate me in front of my manager. They wanted to scream, cause a massive public scene, and threaten my employment until I handed over the platinum card and apologized to Chloe. I can only imagine their confusion as the navigation system guided them away from the downtown restaurant district. They drove further and further into the affluent suburbs, passing gated communities and sprawling green landscapes. Connor probably complained that the tracking application was malfunctioning. Brenda likely complained about the distance, annoyed that she had to travel so far just to yell at me. Finally, the digital map announced they had reached their destination. But they were not parked in front of a diner with sticky tables and a flickering neon sign. They were idling in front of the massive wrought iron security gates of the Crown Culinary Estate. The estate is a $12 million, state-of-the-art private facility I purchased 2 years ago to serve as the headquarters for my executive catering empire. The grounds are immaculately landscaped, and the main building looks more like a modern art museum than a kitchen. Connor pulled up to the intercom, probably assuming I was just a lowly catering assistant working a shift at a wealthy person's house. He buzzed the gate, aggressively telling my security guard that he was family and had an emergency. The guard, trained to de-escalate situations, let them through the exterior gate but immediately radioed my internal team. They parked and burst through the heavy double mahogany doors of the main entrance. They found themselves standing in a breathtaking lobby with vaulted ceilings, imported marble floors, and crystal chandeliers. My corporate receptionist, a very poised young woman named Sarah, stood up behind her sleek reception desk and asked how she could help them. Brenda did not even look at her. "We are looking for Maya," she snapped, waving her hand dismissively as she scanned the elegant room. "Tell her to get out here right now. Her mother is waiting." Sarah politely informed them that Chef Maya was currently in a private tasting session and could not be disturbed. The word chef clearly did not register with them. Connor scoffed, told Sarah to get out of his way, and physically pushed past the reception desk. Chloe and Brenda followed closely behind, marching down the wide, brightly lit hallway like they owned the building. They followed the sound of bustling kitchen activity and swung open the heavy glass doors of the primary tasting room. They barged in, ready to unleash their fury. But the scene in front of them made them freeze completely in their tracks. The tasting room was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private botanical garden. In the center of the room was a massive custom stainless steel prep table, and standing at the head of that table was me. I was not wearing a stained apron or a paper hat. I was wearing a pristine, custom-tailored white executive chef coat. My name was embroidered in elegant gold silk across the left breast. 4 of my highly trained sous chefs were standing at attention beside me, delicately using tweezers to plate exquisite portions of butter-poached lobster and Wagyu beef. Our clients, 2 high-profile film producers, were sitting on a velvet sofa nearby, sipping imported champagne and watching the culinary demonstration. The anger on my family's faces instantly evaporated, replaced by a profound, paralyzing shock. Chloe stared at the crystal chandeliers above us. Brenda stared at my pristine uniform and the respectful way my staff looked at me. Connor stared at the sheer scale of the professional kitchen and the obvious wealth in the room. They had come to humiliate a diner waitress. Instead, they had just trespassed into the domain of a culinary executive. I did not panic. I did not drop what I was doing. I carefully placed a microgreen on top of a lobster tail, wiped my hands on a clean towel, and looked up at the 3 people standing frozen in my doorway. The sheer disbelief in Chloe's eyes was absolute perfection. She was looking at a level of success she had only ever pretended to have. "May I help you?" I asked, my voice calm, professional, and echoing slightly in the large room. Connor opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His arrogant alpha male persona completely short-circuited when faced with actual, undeniable power. Brenda took a faltering step backward, her eyes darting from me to the wealthy client sitting on the sofa. They were entirely out of their element, surrounded by an echelon of society they could not bully or manipulate. The trap they had set for me had just snapped shut around their own ankles. Connor shook his head, desperately trying to clear his confusion. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon his usual arrogance, refusing to accept that he was standing in my domain. "Maya, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you renting this place to pretend you are successful? We do not have time for your games." He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He marched toward my stainless steel prep table and slammed the paper down on the polished surface, nearly knocking over a jar of imported saffron. "This is a quitclaim deed," Connor stated, tapping the paper aggressively. "The bank is being ridiculous about the title search for my commercial loan. They claim there is an irregularity with the original foreclosure records from 5 years ago. I need you to sign this document right now to release any familial claim you think you have on your parents' property. If you sign it, the bank will clear my funds, and I will graciously forget that you shut off the emergency credit card. I did not even look at the paper. I looked at Connor. Then I looked past him to my head of private security. Tyson is a former military contractor who stands 6'4" and wears perfectly tailored black suits. He had been standing quietly in the corner of the room, blending into the shadows. At my subtle nod, Tyson stepped forward. "Sir," Tyson said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded instant obedience. "Step away from the chef's table immediately." Connor flinched, his bravado crumbling the second he realized Tyson was not a mall security guard he could intimidate. He took 2 quick steps backward, bumping into Chloe. I picked up my silver tongs and turned my attention back to the client sitting on the sofa. "I apologize for the interruption," I said smoothly. "Please enjoy the Wagyu preparation while my security handles this minor trespassing issue." "I am not a trespasser," Connor sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he realized the wealthy clients were watching him embarrass himself. "I am your brother-in-law, and you are going to sign this deed." I turned back to him, resting my hands on the cool metal of the table. "I am not signing anything, Connor," I replied, keeping my voice low and dangerous. "And there is no irregularity with the title search. The bank denied your loan because the equity you promised them does not exist. Brenda and Calvin do not own that house. I bought it out of foreclosure 5 years ago. The deed is entirely in my name. I let them live there to save my father's pride. So you cannot use my property to fund a fake luxury lifestyle brand that cannot even afford to buy its own office furniture." Chloe let out a strangled gasp. The color drained completely from her flawless face. "You own it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is impossible. You just cook food." I smiled. "I do cook food, Chloe. I cook food for people who pay me more in a single week than Connor makes in an entire year, and I am officially done subsidizing your delusions." That was the exact moment my mother lost her mind. The reality of her situation shattered her carefully constructed universe. Brenda pushed past Chloe, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She did not care that we were in a multi-million-dollar facility. She did not care about the wealthy clients watching her every move. She only cared about maintaining her absolute control. "I am your mother," Brenda screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. Her voice was shrill and desperate. "That house is mine. I raised you in that house. I am the matriarch of this family. If you think you can steal my legacy and leave me with nothing, you are out of your mind. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will forge your signature myself. I will sign it, I will notarize it, and I will have you thrown out on the street." The entire kitchen went dead silent. The sous chef stopped plating. The clients on the sofa stared in open-mouthed shock. Brenda stood there, her chest heaving, truly believing she had just asserted her dominance over me. From the far side of the room, my corporate attorney stepped forward. "Evelyn is a brilliant, ruthless lawyer who handles all my contracts and real estate holdings." She had been sitting quietly near the window, reviewing the gala paperwork. She closed her leather portfolio with a sharp snap that echoed loudly through the quiet room. Evelyn walked calmly toward my mother, adjusting her designer glasses. "I highly advise against confessing to intended real estate fraud and felony forgery in front of multiple witnesses, ma'am," Evelyn said. Her tone was chillingly professional, especially since I am the one who drafted the original purchase agreement 5 years ago. Brenda stared at Evelyn, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued smoothly, "since you have decided to physically trespass on my client's corporate property and threaten her livelihood, we will be escalating the timeline. I filed the formal 30-day notice of eviction with the county court this morning. It should be arriving at your front door right about now." Calvin, who had been hiding in the hallway the entire time, finally stepped into the doorway. His face was ashen. "Eviction," he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. Maya, what is this woman talking about? You cannot evict us. We are your parents. I looked at the man who had sat at the head of the dining table just days ago, laughing while Connor insulted my entire existence. I looked at the mother who called my hard work inedible. I looked at the sister who thought she was better than me, and the entitled brother-in-law who tried to steal my property. I am talking about consequences, Dad, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You wanted me to pay for takeout. I am just cutting my expenses. Now all of you need to leave my building before Tyson calls the police. Tyson took one heavy step forward. Connor did not need to be told twice. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and practically dragged her toward the exit. Brenda looked like she was going to collapse, hyperventilating as Calvin gently guided her out of the room. They walked back down the beautiful marble hallway, stripped of their pride, their false wealth, and their illusion of control. The empire they thought they ruled had completely crumbled, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. As the heavy mahogany doors of my culinary estate closed behind them, a profound silence settled over the tasting room. My sous chefs looked at me, silently asking if we should pause for the day. I simply picked up my tweezers and instructed them to begin plating the next course. My clients, still sitting on the velvet sofa, were thoroughly impressed not just by the food, but by how efficiently the trash had been taken out. But I knew my family. They were like cornered animals, and cornered animals do not just surrender, they lash out. Their sheer desperation over the next few days was almost pitiful to witness from afar. As I mentioned before, the reality of the eviction notice and the denied commercial loan had driven them to absolute madness, culminating in that pathetic midnight break-in at my corporate office. They had rummaged through my files like common thieves, looking for a way to blackmail me, completely unaware that they were starring in a high-definition security recording that I had already safely downloaded to my encrypted cloud. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought their secret was safe, and because they found no evidence to use against me, they decided to gamble everything they had left on one final, catastrophic spin of the wheel. Chloe and Connor were still determined to host the grand launch party for her fake luxury lifestyle brand that weekend. With the bank loan denied and my emergency credit card permanently shut off, Connor did something incredibly stupid. He went to a predatory private lender. My attorney Evelyn has deep connections in the city's financial district, and she informed me that Connor had taken out a $50,000 short-term loan at an astronomical interest rate. He had leveraged his own luxury car and signed a personal guarantee, completely convinced that this party would attract wealthy investors who would instantly write massive checks to fund Chloe's vanity project. Saturday night arrived, bringing with it the crisp, cool air of the city. The launch party was being held at a highly exclusive rented penthouse loft in the downtown arts district. I did not receive an invitation, of course. But when you are the executive chef who caters to the elite circles of the city, you do not need an invitation to get past the velvet rope. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I did not wear a chef coat tonight. I wore a stunning custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that hugged my curves perfectly. I wore diamond drop earrings that caught the light with every step, and a pair of designer heels that announced my presence with a sharp, authoritative click on the pavement. I looked exactly like the immense wealth they had always pretended to possess. When I arrived at the venue, the street was lined with expensive cars. I bypassed the line at the front door, gave the security guard a warm smile, and stepped onto the private elevator taking me up to the penthouse. The doors opened into a sprawling, industrial chic loft that screamed of desperate, unfunded luxury. There were massive ice sculptures melting slowly in the corners, waiters carrying trays of cheap champagne disguised in expensive crystal flutes, and a state-of-the-art DJ booth pumping ambient electronic music through the room. On the far side of the venue, a massive white projector wall was displaying Chloe's supposed lifestyle brand logo on a continuous, flashing loop. The room was packed with local influencers, minor celebrities, and wealthy socialites. And right in the middle of it all were my parents. Brenda and Calvin were holding court near the bar, sipping champagne and laughing as if their entire world was not actively collapsing. Brenda was wearing a rented designer dress, playing the role of the proud, wealthy matriarch. She was schmoozing with potential investors, desperately trying to project an image of absolute success, actively ignoring the fact that the county sheriff would be changing the locks on her front door in a matter of weeks. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and slowly made my way through the crowd. It took exactly 3 minutes for someone to spot me. It was Brenda. Her loud, artificial laughter died instantly in her throat. Her eyes locked onto me, wide with panic and absolute fury. She slammed her champagne flute down on a cocktail table and marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete floor. Calvin noticed her sudden movement and followed closely behind, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, keeping her voice low so the nearby investors would not hear her. Her face was flushed with anger. "You were not invited. You are not part of this family anymore. Get out right now before I call security and have you physically dragged onto the street." I took a slow, elegant sip of my water. "Hello, Mom. You are looking very tense for a woman celebrating her daughter's massive success. Is the impending homelessness starting to weigh on your nerves?" Calvin stepped forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "Maya, leave!" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "Chloe is about to give her presentation. She has 3 major investors in the room right now. Do not ruin this for her." "I am not here to ruin anything, Dad," I replied smoothly, looking past him to where Chloe and Connor were standing near the stage. They were practically vibrating with nervous energy, shaking hands and begging for business cards. "I am just here to offer a little visual presentation of my own. Consider it my contribution to the family business." I did not wait for their response. I sidestepped my mother, leaving her sputtering in absolute shock, and began walking purposefully toward the elevated DJ booth at the back of the room. The real entertainment for the evening was about to begin. The DJ booth was situated on a raised platform overlooking the entire loft. The DJ, a young guy in a graphic tee, took off his headphones as I approached. I did not ask for permission. I simply reached over, unplugged the auxiliary cable from his mixing board, and plugged it directly into the audio jack of my tablet. I handed him a crisp $100 bill and politely told him to take a 5-minute break. He looked at the money, looked at my designer gown, and wisely stepped down from the platform. I picked up the microphone. "Testing," I said. The sound system was excellent. My voice boomed through the industrial speakers, instantly cutting through the ambient chatter and the clinking of cheap champagne glasses. The entire room went silent. 200 heads turned to look at the DJ booth. Down on the main floor, Chloe and Connor froze. They had been in the middle of pitching their fabricated business to a group of wealthy angel investors. Chloe's jaw practically unhinged when she saw me standing there. Connor turned pale, his eyes darting toward the exits like a trapped rat. "Good evening, everyone," I said, keeping my voice smooth and conversational. "My name is Chef Maya. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Crown Culinary Estate. I know you are all here tonight to celebrate the launch of my sister Chloe's luxury lifestyle brand. However, before any of you open your checkbooks to invest in this venture, I felt it was my familial duty to provide a brief presentation on the founder's actual business practices." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The flashing lifestyle logo on the massive projector wall behind me instantly vanished. It was replaced by the crystal-clear, high-definition security footage from my corporate headquarters. Gasps rippled through the crowd. On the massive screen, a 12-foot-tall version of Connor was wearing a black beanie, violently swinging a crowbar against a locked filing cabinet. Next to him, an equally massive projection of Chloe was pacing nervously by the door, acting as a lookout. The timestamp in the corner clearly showed the footage was taken just 2 nights ago, at 2 in the morning. "What you are watching," I explained calmly into the microphone, "is Connor and Chloe committing felony commercial burglary at my private corporate office." They were desperate to find financial documents they could use to blackmail me. Why? Because the bank permanently denied their commercial business loan. They have absolutely zero capital, no assets, and no collateral. Chloe screamed. "Stop it!" she shrieked, lunging toward the stage, but the crowd physically backed away from her, creating a wide circle of isolation around her and Connor. "Turn it off right now." I ignored her and swiped to the next slide on my tablet. The security footage was replaced by a stark, legal document bearing the letterhead of my corporate attorney. "This is a formal cease and desist order," I continued, my voice echoing through the stunned silence of the loft. "The business plan Connor and Chloe have been pitching to you tonight relies heavily on proprietary catering designs and copyrighted recipes that they stole directly from my company. If you invest in them, you are funding intellectual property theft, and my legal team will be naming you in the subsequent lawsuit." The group of angel investors Connor had been speaking to immediately set their drinks down on the nearest table. One of them, a prominent local businessman, looked at Connor with absolute disgust, shook his head, and began walking straight toward the exit. Within seconds, a mass exodus began. Influencers stopped recording. Socialites grabbed their coats. Nobody wanted to be associated with a sinking ship, especially one going down in a sea of felony charges. Connor stood completely frozen, his fake empire crumbling to dust in front of his eyes. The predatory loan he had taken out to pay for this party was now a financial death sentence. Brenda and Calvin pushed their way to the front of the crowd. Brenda was crying real tears this time, her face a mask of absolute horror, as she watched the wealthy elite of the city flee the room. "Maya, how could you do this to us?" she wailed, clutching Calvin's arm. "We are your family. You are destroying us." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like I was never enough. I looked at the father who had allowed it to happen. "I did not destroy anything, Mom," I said, my voice losing its conversational tone and turning ice cold. "You destroyed it yourselves. You thought my worth was tied to how much disrespect I could swallow. You thought you were the main course, and I was just the scraps. But you forgot one very important detail." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the rapidly emptying room. "The sheriff is at your house right now," I announced clearly. "The 30-day eviction notice has officially expired. They are changing the locks and putting your belongings on the curb. I highly suggest you leave this party and figure out where you are going to sleep tonight, because your keys no longer work." I unplugged my tablet from the mixing board. I did not drop the microphone. I set it down gently on the console, turned around, and walked toward the private elevator. The sound of Brenda sobbing and Chloe screaming at Connor echoed behind me, but I did not look back. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and smiled as the doors closed, finally shutting them out of my life forever. The elevator descent felt like the longest, most peaceful ride of my entire life. As the numbers above the door ticked down to the lobby, I took a deep, cleansing breath. The heavy burden I had carried for 35 years, the constant need for validation from people who only saw me as a resource, was completely gone. I thought back to that afternoon in my tasting room, when my mother had lost her mind and screamed that she would forge my signature on a quitclaim deed. She had been so confident in her ability to commit real estate fraud, completely oblivious to the fact that my corporate attorney was standing right there. Evelyn had warned her then, and they had fled in panic, but they had not learned their lesson. They had to push it to the absolute limit. And now, they had pushed themselves right off a financial cliff. I stepped out of the building and into the cool night air. I handed my ticket to the valet, tipped him generously, and drove home in absolute silence. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. By Monday morning, Evelyn had officially submitted the 4K security footage to the local police department. Because they had broken into a commercial property to steal corporate documents, the charges were severe. Connor was arrested at his leased townhouse before he even had time to put on one of his expensive suits. The predatory lender he had borrowed from did not wait for the legal system to play out. They immediately repossessed his luxury car to cover a fraction of his massive debt. Chloe was left with absolutely nothing. Her luxury lifestyle brand was bankrupt before it even officially launched. Because I had issued the cease and desist regarding my stolen intellectual property, she could not use a single recipe, design, or branding concept she had pitched. The investors who had fled the party wanted nothing to do with her, and the local socialites blacklisted her from every major event in the city. Without Connor's income and completely buried in high-interest debt, Chloe was forced to pawn her designer bags just to afford a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city. But the most satisfying consequence belonged to Brenda and Calvin. When they finally left the disastrous launch party that Saturday night, they drove back to the beautiful brick colonial house they had proudly claimed as their own for decades. But when they pulled into the driveway, they found two county sheriff deputies standing on the front porch. The 30-day eviction notice was not an idle threat. My property management team had officially taken possession of the house. The locks had been drilled and replaced. A small portion of their immediate personal belongings had been boxed up and placed neatly on the front lawn. I heard through the grapevine that Brenda had screamed, cried, and threatened to sue the police department. But the deed was entirely in my name, and the law does not care about a narcissist's ego. They spent that first night sleeping in Calvin's old sedan in a grocery store parking lot. Today, my parents live in a cramped, depressing one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. There are no more lavish Sunday dinners. There are no more church tea parties where Brenda can show off her supposed wealth. They have been entirely cut off from the lifestyle I secretly funded for 5 years. They lost their golden child, they lost their reputation, and they lost their home. As for me, my life has never been richer. 6 months have passed since that explosive night, and Sunday dinners are a tradition I have kept alive. But the table looks very different now. I am standing in the massive outdoor dining pavilion of my culinary estate. The sun is just beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the manicured gardens. In the center of the pavilion is a beautiful, custom-built mahogany table that easily seats 20 people. I did not prepare a $400 standing rib roast tonight. I prepared a feast. There is butter-poached lobster, truffle-infused risotto, perfectly seared Wagyu beef, and a vibrant array of roasted organic vegetables. The aroma fills the evening air, but there is no one here to complain that the food is inedible. Instead, the table is filled with the roar of genuine laughter and the warmth of true appreciation. My head of security, Tyson, is sitting at the far end, telling a story that has my entire kitchen staff in tears from laughing so hard. Evelyn, my brilliant attorney, is pouring a glass of vintage wine for Julian, the boutique owner who had the pleasure of declining Connor's credit card all those months ago. My sous chefs, my mentors, and my closest friends are all here. This is my chosen family. These are the people who respect my craft, who value my time, and who love me for exactly who I am, not for what I can buy them. I sit at the head of the table, raising a glass of champagne to toast the people who matter. I look around at the smiling faces, and I realize that the greatest victory was not just taking back my house or exposing my toxic relatives. The greatest victory was finally recognizing my own worth. They thought my value was tied to how much disrespect I could swallow. They thought they were the main course, and I was just the scraps meant to be tossed aside. But the thing about being an executive chef is that you know exactly how to control the environment. You know exactly how to turn up the heat. And most importantly, you know exactly when it is time to take out the trash. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family to build your own table, I hope you found the courage to never look back, because the life waiting for you on the other side is more delicious than you could ever imagine. I woke up the morning after they stormed my culinary estate feeling lighter than I had in an entire decade. The air in my apartment felt entirely different. It was the distinct absence of a burden I had carried for far too long. I made my morning espresso, walked into my home office, and opened my laptop to review the day's catering schedules. At exactly 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Evelyn, my corporate attorney. She had news from the financial district. Connor's bank had officially and permanently denied his commercial business loan. It was no longer a temporary hold or a minor paperwork delay. The underwriting department had finalized their title search and completely closed the file. I asked Evelyn to walk me through exactly what happened. She explained that she had a contact at that specific bank who shared the details of the morning. Connor had called his loan officer first thing in the morning, yelling into the receiver, demanding to know why the funds had not been deposited into his account. He was acting like a high-rolling chief executive officer who was being inconvenienced by the hired help. The loan officer, a seasoned professional who did not tolerate being spoken to like a servant, simply read the finalized title report aloud to him. He informed Connor that the property they were attempting to leverage had zero equity belonging to Calvin or Brenda. The loan officer explained that the house had been legally transferred to a private corporate entity after a quiet foreclosure half a decade ago. There was no collateral, there was no loan. There would be no luxury lifestyle brand. I could perfectly envision the scene unfolding in my parents' living room at that exact moment. Connor, red in the face, hanging up the phone and turning to Brenda and Calvin in sheer panic. Chloe probably threw a massive tantrum, demanding they call another bank, still completely detached from the reality of their situation. But my father, for all his enabling behavior and cowardice, used to work in the banking sector before he ruined his own career. He knew what a title search meant. He knew the bank did not make mistakes of that magnitude. Evelyn told me that Calvin actually drove down to the county clerk's office later that same morning. He must have been desperate, praying that there was some massive clerical error he could easily fix. He demanded physical copies of the property deeds. Instead of finding a mistake, the clerk handed him a stack of legally binding documents showing my limited liability company as the sole legal owner of the property. He saw my signature. He saw the exact date I had purchased the home directly from the bank. It was the exact month they had been 30 days away from being dragged out onto the street by the sheriff. 5 years ago, my father had made a series of incredibly foolish investments trying to keep up with the wealthy members of their church congregation. At the same time, Brenda refused to stop buying designer clothes, hosting lavish parties, and funding Chloe's endless vacations. When the foreclosure notices started arriving in the mail, they hid them in a drawer. I only found out because a friend of mine worked at their lending institution and recognized their names on a distressed property list. I stepped in immediately. I did not do it for their gratitude, because I knew I would never get it. I did it because I did not want to see my parents homeless and publicly humiliated. I used the substantial profits from my rapidly growing private chef business to buy the house outright. I set up a blind trust to handle the paperwork, letting my parents believe their bank had granted them a miraculous, highly exclusive restructuring program. I paid $3,500 every single month to maintain their illusion of success. For 5 entire years, they lived in my house. They slept under my roof. They used the money they saved on a mortgage to buy Chloe expensive gifts and fund Connor's ridiculous entitled lifestyle. And in return, they treated me like absolute garbage. They insulted my career choices. They told me my food was inedible and that I should just pay for their takeout. They sat in a dining room that I owned, under a chandelier that I paid to keep illuminated, and told me I was not refined enough to understand true wealth. Now the illusion was completely shattered. The horrifying truth was sitting right there in Calvin's trembling hands. They owned absolutely nothing. The brick colonial walls they bragged about, the manicured lawn they hired expensive landscapers to maintain, the grand dining room where they had mocked me just days prior, none of it belonged to them. They were essentially nothing more than ungrateful squatters living in my home on my borrowed time. When the financial floor completely drops out from under a normal family, it usually leads to a moment of deep reflection. You would think that discovering your child had secretly saved you from financial ruin and homelessness would inspire a profound sense of gratitude. You would think it would trigger a deep, humbling apology for years of horrible behavior. But narcissists do not feel gratitude. When faced with the undeniable proof of their own failures, they do not apologize or ask for forgiveness. They attack. The realization that they were completely powerless and entirely dependent on the daughter they had spent a lifetime degrading did not humble my mother. It completely enraged her. Instead of calling me to say thank you for the 5 years of free housing, Brenda decided she was going to destroy me. If she could not control my finances or force me to sign over my property, she was going to control the narrative. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to them, I would be painted as the villain. They retreated to their living room, not to pack their bags, but to prepare for war. They had no money, no leverage, and no legal standing, so they reached for the only weapon they had left: their reputation in the community, and their absolute willingness to lie to anyone who would listen. Calvin returned to the house that afternoon and dropped the thick stack of copied property deeds onto the kitchen island. I did not have to be in the room to know exactly how my mother reacted. For a narcissist like Brenda, being exposed as a charity case is the ultimate psychological injury. She could not accept the reality that her daughter, the one she had spent a lifetime degrading and dismissing, was the only reason she was not sleeping on a park bench. To accept that truth would require humility, and Brenda was entirely devoid of that emotion. Instead of recognizing her own financial failures, she immediately rewrote history. If the house belonged to me, it could not be because she had almost lost it to foreclosure. It had to be because I had maliciously stolen it from her. She needed a narrative where she was the helpless, innocent victim, and I was the calculating villain. And once she locked onto that delusion, she weaponized it with terrifying speed. By Tuesday evening, the smear campaign was in full swing. I was sitting in my apartment, finalizing the menu for a corporate retreat, when my personal cell phone began vibrating endlessly against the granite countertop. It was not just one or two messages. It was an absolute avalanche of notifications. Texts, missed calls, and social media alerts poured in by the second. I unlocked my screen and opened Facebook. Right at the top of my feed was a live video broadcast from Brenda. She had perfectly staged the production. She was sitting on the expensive living room sofa that I indirectly paid for, bathed in soft, sympathetic lighting. She had deliberately chosen to wear an old, slightly faded cardigan over her blouse to make herself look fragile and financially strained. Calvin was sitting right next to her, looking down at his hands, playing the role of the defeated, exhausted patriarch. I tapped the video and listened as my mother delivered the performance of a lifetime. She stared directly into the camera, her eyes brimming with perfectly timed tears. She told her church group, our extended family, and hundreds of local community members a completely fabricated story of absolute betrayal. She claimed that 5 years ago, when Calvin was dealing with some minor health issues and was supposedly heavily medicated, I had come to them with a stack of confusing financial documents. She told the camera that I had promised to help them consolidate some minor debts, but instead, I had secretly slipped a property transfer agreement into the pile. My own flesh and blood, Brenda sobbed into a tissue, her voice shaking with manufactured heartbreak. We trusted her. We gave her everything, and she manipulated us. She stole the legacy we built for our family. She stole the roof over our heads. And now, out of pure spite and jealousy over her sister Chloe's incredible business success, she is trying to throw us out onto the street. The video was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. She hit every single talking point guaranteed to incite outrage in a tight-knit religious community. She painted me as an elder abuser, a jealous sister, and a greedy monster all in one breath. The comment section below the video was a blazing inferno of misplaced righteous anger. Women from her church auxiliary group, people I had known since childhood, were calling for my absolute ruin. Distant aunts and uncles who had not bothered to call me on my birthday in a decade were suddenly leaving me vicious voicemails, demanding that I repent and return the house to my parents immediately. Chloe, naturally, did not miss the opportunity to capitalize on the drama. She shared Brenda's video to her own page, adding a long, dramatic caption. She claimed that my supposed theft of the house was the exact reason her luxury lifestyle brand was facing temporary financial hurdles. She asked her followers for prayers and shamelessly included a link to a crowdfunding campaign to help her save her business from her evil, vindictive sister. Connor even chimed in from his fake corporate account, threatening to expose my catering business to the local health department. I sat back on my velvet sofa, sipping a glass of sparkling water, and watched the view count on my mother's video climb past 2,000. A younger version of me would have been utterly devastated. A younger me would have experienced a full-blown panic attack. I would have desperately typed out paragraphs of defense in the comment section, trying to explain the truth. I would have frantically gathered my old bank statements, the original foreclosure notices, and the blind trust documents, begging the extended family to look at the undeniable proof of my innocence. But I am 35 years old. I have built an empire from the ground up, navigating ruthless corporate clients and highly demanding celebrities. I learned a long time ago that arguing with a narcissist is like wrestling with a pig in the mud. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. Brenda wanted a public war. She wanted me to engage. She wanted me to look erratic and defensive, because every time I reacted, it would only give her more ammunition to play the victim. She honestly believed that if she rallied enough public outrage, the sheer social pressure would break me. She thought that if the church choir and the neighborhood gossip circle turned against me, I would eventually cave, sign the quitclaim deed, and hand over an $800,000 property just to make the bullying stop. She fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamic of the real world. Public opinion is a fickle, entirely useless currency when it comes to the law. Facebook likes do not override county property records. Slanderous gossip in the church pews does not pay a commercial mortgage. My mother was fighting a war of emotions while I was operating entirely on facts. I did not type a single response. I did not block my family members because I wanted their unhinged threats safely documented. I simply archived the text messages, downloaded Brenda's defamatory video to my encrypted cloud server right next to the footage of Chloe and Connor committing a felony, and set my phone on silent. Let them talk. Let them spin their elaborate web of lies and gather the sympathy of fools. They were spending all their energy trying to win the court of public opinion, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to lose the actual roof over their heads. I finished my sparkling water, picked up my phone, and dialed my attorney. It was time to stop watching the circus and officially drop the curtain. I called my corporate attorney Evelyn the very next morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, drinking a fresh cup of espresso, watching the morning traffic move silently through the city far below my apartment windows. I felt incredibly peaceful. My mother Brenda had spent the entire previous evening trying to incite an online mob against me with her fabricated, tearful Facebook video. She honestly believed that public pressure from our extended family and her church congregation would force me to surrender my multi-million-dollar property to her. She thought I would be terrified of the gossip. Instead, I was just completely exhausted by her predictable theatrics. I told Evelyn that the smear campaign had officially crossed the line into public defamation. But rather than sending a useless cease and desist letter, it was time to strike at the actual root of the problem. It was time to legally serve the eviction notice. Evelyn was more than happy to oblige. She explained the exact legal protocol we would follow. Because my parents had never signed a formal lease agreement and had not paid a single dime in rent for the 5 years they lived in my house, they were legally classified as tenants at will. They had absolutely zero legal protections to stay in the property against my wishes. Evelyn prepared the formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. It clearly stated that they had exactly 1 month to pack up their entire lives and remove themselves from the property, or the county sheriff would be dispatched to physically remove them and change the locks. I gave Evelyn one very specific instruction regarding the delivery of the documents. I insisted that she hire a premium legal courier service, and I demanded that the process server wear a discreet, legally compliant body camera. I knew my mother better than anyone. If a strange man showed up at her front door to hand her legal documents, she would instantly spin a new lie. She would call the police and claim he was aggressive, that he physically threatened her, or that he tried to force his way into the house. She would use the delivery as another opportunity to play the helpless victim. I needed undeniable high-definition audio and video proof of exactly how the interaction unfolded to protect myself from her inevitable accusations. Evelyn hired a highly professional process server who specialized in high-conflict deliveries. He arrived at my childhood home at exactly 3:00 on a Wednesday afternoon. I did not have to guess what happened, because Evelyn forwarded the secure video file to me later that evening. I sat in my home office, opened the file on my large monitor, and watched the entire cinematic interaction unfold from the comfort of my leather chair. The video started with the process server walking up the long, manicured brick walkway toward the colonial house. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon. Through the large bay windows facing the front lawn, the camera captured a very clear view of the gathering inside. Brenda was hosting her weekly church auxiliary tea party. There were at least 6 older women sitting in the formal living room, balancing delicate porcelain teacups on their knees. These were the exact same women who had been leaving vicious, judgmental comments on my Facebook page just 24 hours earlier, condemning me for supposedly stealing my parents' legacy. Brenda was standing near the grand stone fireplace, wearing a tailored pastel dress and a string of genuine pearls. She was holding a polished silver serving tray, layered with assorted pastries and finger sandwiches. She was completely in her element, holding court, smiling graciously, and likely continuing her dramatic, entirely fabricated tale of my betrayals. Calvin was sitting quietly in a high-backed chair in the corner, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply burdened father. The process server stepped onto the porch and rang the doorbell. The loud chime echoed clearly through the heavy oak door. On the video footage, Brenda handed the silver tray to one of the church elders and walked gracefully toward the entryway. She opened the front door with a practiced, radiant smile, clearly expecting to greet another neighbor who had stopped by to offer their sympathies and drop off a casserole. The server was incredibly polite and perfectly unassuming. He asked if he was speaking to Brenda and Calvin. Brenda puffed out her chest slightly, her smile widening as she confirmed that she was indeed the lady of the house. The server did not flinch or break eye contact. He reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope with the county court seal stamped boldly across the front. He handed it to her, stating clearly and professionally that she was being legally served on behalf of the Crown Culinary Estate Property Management Trust. Brenda looked confused. She did not immediately close the door. Instead, driven by her own dramatic nature and her desperate need for an audience, she ripped open the envelope right there in the entryway. She left the front door wide open so the server and her guests in the living room could see everything. She pulled out the heavy stack of legal documents and unfolded them. The body camera caught the exact microsecond her eyes scanned the bold, capitalized black letters printed at the very top of the first page. Notice to vacate. 30-day eviction. The radiant, gracious smile completely melted off her face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The hand holding the documents froze, while her other hand, which had been resting near her collarbone, began to shake violently. She took a staggering step backward. She backed right into a small, decorative entryway table, bumping a porcelain vase. She did not even notice. She just stared at the paper, her breathing suddenly becoming rapid and shallow. The women in the living room immediately stopped their hushed gossiping. They sensed the sudden shift in the atmosphere and rushed toward the entryway to see what had happened. One of the prominent church elders asked Brenda if everything was all right. her voice dripping with misplaced concern, assuming it was more bad news about her health or another supposed attack from me. Brenda could not speak. Her throat was completely paralyzed by the reality of her situation. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing silently, staring at the legal eviction notice in her trembling hands. The church elder gently took the papers from my mother's paralyzed grip to read them herself. You could hear the audible gasp on the camera microphone as the older woman read the legal terminology out loud. Eviction. 30 days to vacate the premises. Ownership confirmed by the county clerk. The facade Brenda had spent decades building was instantly and completely shattered. She had spent the entire week telling these women that she owned the house free and clear, and that I was just a jealous daughter trying to steal her legacy through manipulation. But a formal court-ordered eviction notice from a corporate entity proved the exact opposite. It legally proved that she was nothing more than a tenant. It proved that she did not own the wealth she was constantly bragging about. The women looked at Brenda. Their expressions shifted rapidly from deep, maternal sympathy to profound suspicion and absolute embarrassment. They realized in real time that they had been completely lied to. They had publicly defended a woman who was living a complete lie. The process server politely confirmed for the camera that the service was complete. He turned around and walked back down the brick walkway, getting into his vehicle. The video ended there, but the damage was irreversible. Brenda had tried to ruin my reputation on the internet by playing the victim, but I had just dismantled her entire reality in her own living room, in front of the very audience she valued most. The fallout from the tea party was absolute and immediate, but while Brenda was completely immobilized by her public humiliation, the panic affected Chloe and Connor very differently. For my sister and my entitled brother-in-law, the eviction notice was not just a blow to their ego, it was the final nail in their financial coffin. Their grand launch party was just 2 days away. They owed tens of thousands of dollars to a ruthless private lender, and the bank loan they desperately needed was permanently dead. They were staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy, and fear makes arrogant people do incredibly reckless things. They could not accept the simple truth that I had saved the family from foreclosure 5 years ago. Connor, with his fragile ego and his manufactured alpha male persona, simply could not process the fact that a black woman he openly mocked as a lowly diner cook had entirely outsmarted him in the real estate market. In his mind, I had to be a criminal. He convinced Chloe that I must have forged the property transfer documents. He told her that the real foreclosure papers, the ones proving Brenda and Calvin still somehow owned the equity, had to be hidden somewhere in my corporate office. They believed that if they could just find those imaginary documents, they could blackmail me into signing a quitclaim deed, thereby saving the house, securing their bank loan, and funding their fake luxury lifestyle brand. It was a delusion born out of pure desperation, and it drove them straight into committing a major felony. It was Thursday night, pushing into the very early hours of Friday morning. I was wide awake in my high-rise apartment, sitting in my darkened living room with my laptop open, reviewing vendor contracts. The city outside my windows was completely silent. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, my phone vibrated sharply against the glass coffee table, the screen illuminated with a high-priority alert from the corporate security system installed at the Crown Culinary Estate. Warning: perimeter breach detected at the administrative wing. I did not panic. I did not immediately dial 911. I simply picked up my phone, opened the security application, and accessed the live, high-definition night vision camera feeds. My estate is equipped with military-grade surveillance, complete with crystal-clear audio recording capabilities. I tapped the screen and watched the absolute absurdity of my family unfold in real time. Connor and Chloe had parked his leased luxury sedan down the street, hidden behind a row of tall hedges, likely thinking they were being incredibly stealthy. The exterior cameras caught them jogging across the manicured lawn toward the back of the building. Connor was wearing a ridiculous black beanie pulled down low over his forehead, dressed entirely in dark clothing like a cartoon burglar. Chloe, somehow lacking any fundamental understanding of a covert operation, was wearing a dark velvet designer tracksuit and expensive running shoes. I switched to the camera positioned near the rear fire exit. Connor pulled a heavy steel crowbar out of his jacket. He jammed it into the seam of the heavy metal door and began throwing his entire body weight against it. He grunted and swore loudly, clearly struggling. It took him nearly 5 minutes of aggressive, clumsy prying before the reinforced locking mechanism finally gave way with a loud, metallic snap. They slipped inside the darkened hallway, immediately triggering the silent alarms that sent the notification directly to my phone. I switched the video feed to the interior camera mounted in my personal executive office. The heavy mahogany door was pushed open. Connor walked in first, clicking on a small tactical flashlight. He swept the beam across my massive oak desk, the leather chairs, and the row of heavy steel filing cabinets lining the far wall. Chloe slipped in right behind him, nervously looking over her shoulder, completely oblivious to the small red recording light blinking from the camera dome directly above her head. The audio feed was so crisp I could hear their rapid breathing. "Hurry up, Connor," Chloe whispered harshly, her voice trembling with anxiety. "If the alarm company calls the police, we are completely ruined. Just find the deed and let us get out of here." "There is no alarm," Connor replied, his voice dripping with his usual unearned confidence as he walked toward my filing cabinets. "She is just a caterer, Chloe. She probably bought the cheapest security system on the market. Just watch the door while I get these open." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water in my apartment, watching this man insult my intelligence while actively standing inside my $12 million facility. Connor wedged the crowbar into the top drawer of my primary filing cabinet and violently yanked downward. The metal bent and warped until the lock snapped off, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. He pulled the drawer open and began frantically tearing through my meticulously organized files. He was looking for real estate deeds, bank transfers, and forged signatures. Instead, he found the reality of my success. "What is all this garbage?" Connor muttered angrily, throwing a handful of thick manila folders onto the floor. He shined his flashlight onto a stack of invoices he had just pulled out. The camera captured him pausing, his eyes scanning the paperwork. I knew exactly what he was looking at. It was the monthly billing statements for my celebrity clients. "Are you kidding me?" Connor whispered, his voice suddenly sounding very small and tight. He held the paper up so Chloe could see it. "She charges $30,000 for a single weekend retreat. Chloe, there are contracts in here worth more than my entire commercial loan." Chloe hurried over, abandoning her post at the door. She snatched the paperwork out of his hand, shining the flashlight directly onto the pages. The green night vision filter on my screen highlighted the absolute shock and deep, burning jealousy twisting her facial features. She was staring at undeniable, documented proof that the sister she had mocked for smelling like onions and bleach was sitting on a culinary empire. "She does not deserve this," Chloe hissed, throwing the contracts onto my desk in a fit of pure resentment. "She is a fraud. The house documents have to be here, Connor. She stole our family legacy to fund this place. Keep looking." Connor moved to the next filing cabinet, his movements more aggressive and frantic now. He ripped open drawers, tossing confidential non-disclosure agreements, vendor supply lists, and imported ingredient manifests all over my beautiful office. They tore the room apart for another 15 minutes, growing increasingly desperate as they realized there was no smoking gun. There was no forged deed. There were no fake bank statements. The documents they needed to blackmail me simply did not exist in that office because the legitimate, legally binding deed to the house was sitting safely inside the heavy steel floor safe back in my apartment. They had risked everything, committed a major felony, and ruined my office, all for absolutely nothing. "This is useless," Connor finally snapped, breathing heavily as he dropped the crowbar onto my desk. The metal clanged loudly. "It is not here. We need to go before a security patrol drives by." Chloe looked around the destroyed office, her chest heaving. "We are dead," she whispered, the reality of their impending financial doom finally breaking through her delusion. "We have no money for the launch party. We have no house for the collateral. What are we going to do?" Connor grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly toward the door. "We will figure it out tomorrow," he growled. "Just move." I watched the screen as they scrambled back out into the hallway, leaving my office in absolute ruins. I switched the camera feeds, tracking them as they ran out the broken fire door and sprinted across the lawn, disappearing back into the dark tree line toward their car. The entire break-in lasted exactly 22 minutes. I sat back in my living room, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. My office was a disaster, but I did not care about the bent filing cabinets or the scattered papers. They had given me exactly what I needed. They thought they had escaped into the night unseen, but they had just handed me the ultimate weapon to ensure their complete and total destruction. The sun began to rise over the city, casting a pale morning light across my living room. I had not slept a single minute, but I was not tired. The pure adrenaline of watching my family commit a documented felony had completely erased my need for rest. I sat at my kitchen island with a fresh cup of coffee, replaying the 22-minute high-definition security video of Connor and Chloe destroying my office. I watched it 3 times, memorizing every frantic, desperate movement they made. At 6 in the morning, I drove down to the Crown Culinary Estate. My head of private security, Tyson, was already waiting for me in the main lobby. He had seen the system alerts when he woke up and was practically vibrating with professional rage. He had his phone in his hand, ready to dispatch the local police department to my brother-in-law's leased townhouse to make an immediate arrest. I held up my hand and told Tyson to put his phone away. I explained that we were not calling the authorities just yet. He looked at me like I had lost my mind, but he silently followed me down the marble hallway toward the administrative wing. We stepped into my executive office, and the reality of their desperation was laid bare. The heavy mahogany door was splintered near the locking mechanism. My beautiful steel filing cabinets were bent and warped from Connor violently using his crowbar. Confidential catering contracts, vendor agreements, and hundreds of pages of financial records were scattered across the hardwood floor like garbage. Tyson began taking photographs for the insurance claim, documenting the physical damage. But as I walked behind my desk and looked at the empty drawers, I realized something was very wrong. Connor and Chloe had broken in looking for forged real estate deeds, which obviously did not exist. But they did not leave completely empty-handed. My bottom desk drawer had been pried open, and my master proprietary binder was gone. This binder did not contain financial information. It contained the entire intellectual foundation of my catering empire. It held my signature event blueprints, highly confidential recipes that I had spent a decade perfecting, exclusive vendor contact lists, and detailed floor plans for million-dollar corporate galas. I stood perfectly still as the realization washed over me. Chloe was supposed to be launching a luxury lifestyle brand in less than 48 hours. She had invited prominent angel investors and local socialites to her grand launch party, promising to unveil a revolutionary new approach to high-end event planning and catering. But Chloe had no original ideas. She had no business experience. She was drowning in predatory debt. And in her panic, she had decided to steal my life's work, to pass off as her own portfolio. I walked out of the destroyed office and immediately called Evelyn, my corporate attorney. She arrived at the estate less than an hour later, carrying her signature leather briefcase. We sat in the private tasting room, far away from the wreckage, and I played the security footage for her on my tablet. Evelyn watched in absolute silence as Connor swung the crowbar, and Chloe acted as the panicked lookout. When the video ended, Evelyn took off her designer glasses and rubbed her temples. She stated that we had concrete evidence of commercial burglary, trespassing, and corporate espionage. She told me she could have them both in handcuffs by noon. I shook my head. I told Evelyn that if we arrested them today, Connor would simply post bail. He would go to his launch party on Saturday night and spin a massive lie to his investors. He would claim it was a family misunderstanding, play the victim, and use the sympathy to secure his funding. I refused to let them control the narrative ever again. I outlined my plan to Evelyn. We were going to let them host their party. We were going to let them spend the $50,000 Connor had borrowed from a predatory lender. We were going to let them gather every important, wealthy person in the city into one room. And right when Chloe stood up to present my stolen recipes and event blueprints as her own genius ideas, I was going to drop the financial guillotine. Evelyn smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made me incredibly glad she was on my side. She opened her laptop right there in the tasting room and immediately began drafting a brutal, legally binding cease and desist order. She cited intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and copyright infringement. She made sure the language was severe enough to terrify anyone who even thought about investing in Chloe's fraudulent company. With the legal trap securely prepared, I spent the rest of Friday focusing on the technical execution. Julian, the upscale boutique owner who had declined Connor's credit card, was a close friend of mine. He had been invited to the launch party and happily provided me with all the logistical details. I knew they had rented a massive industrial loft in the downtown arts district. I knew they had hired a local DJ and rented a state-of-the-art projection system to display their stolen presentation. I purchased a set of universal audio-visual adapters and loaded the 4K security footage, along with Evelyn's signed cease and desist order, directly onto my presentation tablet. I tested the playback multiple times to ensure the audio of Connor admitting he had no money was loud and crystal clear. Friday night slowly turned into Saturday morning. I could only imagine the chaotic energy inside my parents' house. Chloe was likely frantically copying my event blueprints onto expensive presentation boards, convincing herself that she was a brilliant entrepreneur. Connor was probably pacing the floors, sweating over the predatory loan he had personally guaranteed, praying these angel investors would write massive checks to save him from bankruptcy. And Brenda, still reeling from the eviction notice she had received in front of her church friends, was undoubtedly preparing to play the role of the wealthy, supportive matriarch one last time. Saturday evening finally arrived. The air in my apartment felt charged with electricity. I walked into my walk-in closet to select my armor for the evening. I bypassed my professional chef coats and my casual wear. I pulled out a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that hugged my curves perfectly. I paired it with diamond drop earrings and a pair of designer heels that would announce my presence with absolute authority. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I was no longer the scapegoat who quietly cooked their meals and swallowed their insults. I was the architect of their downfall. The trap was set, the evidence was loaded, and the guests were arriving. It was time to crash a party. The 2 weeks leading up to the grand launch party passed in a blur of calculated anticipation. While I was busy finalizing the menus for my legitimate corporate clients, my family was spiraling into a vortex of sheer financial terror. Evelyn kept me updated on the increasingly erratic moves my brother-in-law was making. Since traditional banking institutions had permanently slammed their doors in his face after the title search exposed his total lack of collateral, Connor had turned to the absolute bottom of the financial barrel. He had secured a $50,000 short-term loan from a notorious private lender who operated out of a strip mall in the industrial district. The interest rate was completely predatory, and the repayment terms were brutal. Connor had put up his leased luxury sedan as collateral and signed a personal guarantee that would mathematically ruin him for the next decade if he defaulted. But Connor and Chloe were completely blinded by their own arrogance. They genuinely believed that if they threw a flashy enough party, the wealthy elite of the city would simply hand them blank checks to fund their stolen ideas. The venue they chose was a sprawling industrial loft in the downtown arts district. From the outside, it looked exactly like the kind of exclusive, high-society event my sister had always dreamed of hosting. A red carpet was rolled out across the cracked concrete sidewalk. Velvet ropes held back a completely non-existent crowd of paparazzi. A hired photographer stood near the entrance, snapping photos of local micro-influencers who had only shown up for the free alcohol and the networking opportunities. Inside, the loft was a masterclass in manufactured luxury. They had blown nearly half of their predatory loan on temporary aesthetics to mask their empty bank accounts. Massive floral arrangements completely obscured the water-stained brick walls. A state-of-the-art projection system was currently displaying Chloe's fabricated lifestyle brand logo on a continuous loop against the far white wall. A hired DJ was stationed on a raised platform, playing trendy electronic music that was just slightly too loud for comfortable conversation. But as a professional who orchestrates high-net-worth events for a living, I could instantly see the cheap reality hiding just beneath the surface. The leather lounge chairs scattered around the room were low-grade rentals. The elaborate hors d'oeuvres circling the room on silver trays were frozen, mass-produced appetizers that had simply been heated up in a microwave. And the champagne flowing into the crystal flutes was a bottom-shelf brand that tasted like sweetened battery acid. I stood near the coat check, hidden in the shadows of the dimly lit entryway, watching my family perform the most desperate acting routine of their entire lives. Brenda and Calvin were holding court near the center of the room. They were both dressed in their absolute finest clothes, holding their cheap champagne with practiced elegance. Brenda was laughing loudly at a joke made by a local real estate developer, tossing her head back and touching his arm with a level of familiarity she definitely had not earned. She was playing the role of the wealthy, carefree matriarch to absolute perfection. You would never guess by looking at her that exactly 14 days from now, the county sheriff would be drilling the locks off her front door and placing her furniture on the curb. She was desperately scanning the room, hunting for anyone wealthy enough to invest in Chloe's company, praying that a massive influx of cash could somehow reverse her impending homelessness. Calvin stood rigidly beside her, his smile completely hollow. His eyes constantly darted toward the exits. He knew exactly how close they were to total ruin, but he was too weak to stop Brenda's charade. He just nodded along to her fabricated stories about their sprawling colonial home, sipping his drink with a trembling hand. Across the room, Connor and Chloe were working the crowd with a manic, frantic energy. Chloe was wearing a designer dress that she had almost certainly bought with a fraudulent credit card. She was speaking to a small group of potential angel investors, gesturing wildly with her manicured hands. I could read her lips from across the room. She was using all the corporate buzzwords she had read on the internet. Synergy, disruption, high-end curation. She was pitching my stolen catering blueprints and proprietary event designs as if she had spent years developing them herself. Connor was hovering right behind her, sweating profusely through his tailored suit jacket. He was trying to project the image of a successful chief executive officer, but he looked exactly like a cornered animal. Every time an investor asked a specific question about profit margins or supply chain logistics, Connor would laugh nervously, dodge the question, and attempt to refill their glasses. He knew that if they did not walk out of this loft tonight with at least $100,000 in committed capital, the predatory lender was going to seize his car, drain his accounts, and destroy his life. The sheer audacity of the entire production was almost impressive. They were standing in a rented room, drinking cheap wine, trying to sell stolen ideas to people they secretly despised, all while pretending they were not drowning in debt and facing imminent eviction. It was a beautiful, fragile house of cards, built entirely on a foundation of lies and entitlement. I adjusted the neckline of my emerald green evening gown. I felt the comforting weight of my presentation tablet tucked securely inside my designer clutch. The security footage of their felony break-in and the legally binding cease and desist order were perfectly loaded and ready to be projected onto that massive white wall. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel the sting of my mother's rejection or the frustration of my sister's relentless jealousy. I only felt the cold, precise focus of an executive chef who is about to serve the final course of a very long, very bitter meal. I stepped out of the shadows of the entryway and walked directly onto the main floor. The soft click of my heels was drowned out by the music, but my presence was instantly felt. As I glided past the rented furniture and the trays of frozen appetizers, heads began to turn. The deep emerald silk of my gown caught the ambient lighting, projecting an aura of genuine, undeniable wealth that completely eclipsed Chloe's frantic performance. I was not sneaking into the party. I was not hiding. I was walking straight toward the center of the room, ready to look my mother in the eye and watch her entire world shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The moment I stepped fully into the light of the main floor, the atmosphere in the rented loft began to shift. It was not a sudden silence, but a gradual ripple of awareness that spread outward from where I stood. The local influencers and minor socialites parted slightly to let me through, their eyes taking in the custom tailoring of my emerald green gown and the undeniable sparkle of genuine diamonds at my ears. They did not know who I was, but in circles that worship wealth, true power has a gravitational pull that cannot be ignored. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, navigating the sea of rented furniture and cheap floral arrangements. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Connor freeze mid-sentence. He had been pitching his fabricated business model to a wealthy real estate developer, but the moment he spotted me, all the color drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the train tracks and the locomotive was already blowing its horn. Chloe noticed his reaction and followed his line of sight. When she saw me walking through her party, looking like the absolute embodiment of the success she was desperately trying to fake, her jaw visibly dropped. She took a step backward, nearly knocking over a tray of those terrible frozen appetizers. But it was Brenda who reacted first. My mother has always possessed a predatory instinct for protecting her own delusions. She excused herself from the group of women she had been charming and began marching directly toward me. Her face was flushed, and her polite society smile was completely gone, replaced by a mask of sheer panic and venom. She intercepted me near the center of the room, stepping directly into my path to block my progress. Up close, I could see the heavy layers of makeup she had applied to hide the stress of her impending eviction. "What do you think you are doing here?" Brenda hissed. She kept her voice just low enough to avoid drawing the immediate attention of her wealthy guests, but the absolute fury in her tone was unmistakable. "You were not invited to this event. You are ruining your sister's most important night." I did not stop walking. I simply slowed my pace, forcing her to walk backwards awkwardly to stay in front of me. "Hello, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and conversational. "I am just here to offer a little presentation of my own. Consider it my final contribution to the family business." Brenda reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into the silk of my dress. "Get out right now," she spat, her eyes wild with desperation. "You are not family anymore. Do you hear me? You are nothing to us. Security. I need security over here right now to remove this woman." She looked around frantically for one of the hired bouncers, but they were stationed at the front door, oblivious to her quiet meltdown. I looked down at the hand clutching my arm. Then I looked back up into my mother's terrified eyes. I did not yell. I did not pull away. I simply smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that finally communicated the one thing she had never understood. I was no longer afraid of her. I stepped smoothly to the side, breaking her grip without exerting any visible effort. I left her standing there, sputtering in shock, completely paralyzed by my absolute lack of submission. I did not give her another second of my time. I continued my walk directly toward the back of the room, my eyes fixed on the raised platform where the DJ was stationed. The real entertainment for the evening was about to begin, and I was ready to take the stage. The DJ booth was elevated just enough to give me a perfect vantage point over the entire loft. The young man hired to play the electronic music took off his headphones as I approached, looking confused by my presence. I did not ask for permission, and I did not bother explaining myself. I reached over his mixing board, unplugged the auxiliary cable from his laptop, and firmly plugged it into the audio jack of my own presentation tablet. I picked up the heavy metal microphone resting on the console. I tapped it once. A sharp, commanding thump echoed through the massive industrial speakers, instantly cutting through the ambient noise of the party. The entire room went dead silent. 200 heads turned simultaneously to look at the DJ booth. Down on the main floor, Chloe and Connor stood completely frozen. Brenda and Calvin were staring up at me, their faces pale masks of impending doom. I had their undivided attention. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and perfectly projected across the silent room. I did not yell. When you hold all the power, you do not need to raise your voice. My name is Chef Maya. I am the founder and chief executive officer of the Crown Culinary Estate. I know you are all gathered here tonight to celebrate the grand launch of my sister Chloe's luxury lifestyle brand. However, before any of you open your checkbooks or transfer a single dollar to fund this venture, I felt an ethical obligation to provide a brief presentation on the founder's actual business practices. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The massive white projector wall behind me, which had been displaying Chloe's fake logo, instantly flickered and changed. It was replaced by the crystal-clear, 4K night vision security footage from my corporate headquarters. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of investors and socialites. On the massive screen, a 12-foot-tall projection of Connor was violently swinging a heavy steel crowbar against my locked filing cabinets. Right next to him, a massive projection of Chloe was pacing nervously by the door, acting as a panicked lookout. The timestamp flashing in the bottom corner of the video clearly showed that this felony had occurred just 48 hours ago. "What you are watching right now," I explained smoothly into the microphone, "is Connor and Chloe committing commercial burglary and corporate espionage at my private office. They broke in because traditional banks permanently denied their business loans. They have absolutely zero capital, no viable assets, and no collateral to offer you." "Turn it off!" Chloe shrieked. Her voice cracked, echoing pitifully across the room. She lunged forward, but the investors standing near her immediately stepped back, treating her like she was suddenly radioactive. A wide circle of isolation formed around my sister and brother-in-law. I ignored her completely and swiped my finger across the tablet screen. The security footage vanished, replaced immediately by a stark, heavily worded legal document bearing the official letterhead of my corporate attorney. "This is a legally binding cease and desist order," I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly over the sound of Chloe sobbing. "The entire business plan they have been pitching to you tonight relies heavily on proprietary event designs and copyrighted culinary blueprints that they stole directly from my company during that break-in. If you invest a single dime in them, you are actively funding intellectual property theft, and my legal team will be naming you as co-defendants in the subsequent lawsuit." The reaction was instantaneous. The wealthy real estate developer Connor had been trying to impress practically threw his cheap champagne glass onto a nearby table and marched straight toward the exit. Within seconds, a mass exodus began. The local influencers stopped taking photos and started grabbing their coats. Nobody in that room was willing to attach their reputation, let alone their money, to a sinking ship captained by documented felons. Connor stood rooted to the floor, his mouth hanging open. The predatory loan he had taken out to pay for this exact party was now a financial death sentence. He was completely, mathematically ruined. I let the chaos unfold for a few seconds before turning my attention to the center of the room, where Brenda and Calvin were standing in absolute horror. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "You wanted takeout, Mom?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that carried perfectly through the microphone. "Well, I brought the receipts." Brenda flinched as if she had been physically struck. "And by the way," I added, delivering the final, devastating blow. The county sheriff is at your house right now. Your 30-day notice expired this morning. They are currently drilling the locks off the front door and placing your furniture on the curb. I highly suggest you leave this lovely party and figure out where you are going to sleep tonight because your keys no longer work. I unplugged my tablet from the mixing board. I set the microphone down gently on the console. I did not stay to watch them weep. I turned around, walked to the private elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. The sound of Brenda's hysterical wailing and Chloe screaming at Connor echoed behind me, but I did not look back. I stepped into the elevator and smiled as the heavy doors closed, finally shutting them out of my life forever. The elevator ride down to the ground floor felt like a victory lap. When the heavy metal doors slid open to the lobby, I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of the city and took a deep breath. For 35 years, my lungs had felt constricted by the weight of my family and their endless, suffocating expectations. Now, the air tasted entirely different. It tasted like absolute freedom. I handed my ticket to the valet, tipped him a crisp $100 bill, and drove back to my apartment in perfect, unbroken silence. While I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the financial house of cards I had just kicked over was collapsing with spectacular violence. The immediate fallout at the rented loft was exactly as disastrous as I had calculated. Julian, who had stayed behind simply to watch the carnage, called me the next morning to deliver the details. Once I left, total panic had consumed the room. The remaining investors practically sprinted for the exits. The predatory lender, who had sent a representative to the party to keep an eye on his $50,000 investment, cornered Connor near the coat check. There was no polite negotiation. The representative informed my brother-in-law that his personal guarantee was being called in immediately. By Monday morning, Evelyn marched into the local police precinct and formally submitted the 4K security footage of the break-in, along with a comprehensive list of the stolen corporate documents. Because Connor and Chloe had crossed county lines to break into a commercial property and steal intellectual data, the district attorney did not hesitate. At exactly 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, 2 police cruisers pulled up onto the manicured lawn of Connor's leased townhouse. He was handcuffed on his own front porch, still wearing his expensive silk pajamas, while his wealthy neighbors watched through their living room windows. He was formally charged with commercial burglary and corporate espionage. Chloe was left standing in the doorway, sobbing uncontrollably, but her nightmare was only just beginning. Because the predatory lender moved faster than the legal system, 2 men arrived with tow trucks later that same afternoon. They repossessed Connor's luxury sedan and Chloe's designer sports car directly from the driveway. Her bank accounts, which were tied to Connor's fraudulent business applications, were entirely frozen. The legal cease and desist order I had filed meant her luxury lifestyle brand was officially dead on arrival. She could not launch a single product, host a single event, or secure a single client without triggering a massive civil lawsuit from my corporate attorneys. Within a matter of days, the golden child of the family was entirely bankrupt. Blacklisted by the local socialites and drowning in high-interest debt, Chloe was forced to pawn her collection of designer handbags just to afford a security deposit on a cheap motel room. But the most poetic justice of all belonged to Brenda and Calvin. When they fled the disastrous launch party that Saturday night, they drove back to the affluent suburbs in absolute terrified silence. They pulled into the long driveway of the beautiful brick colonial house they had claimed as their own for decades. But the house was completely dark, and parked squarely in front of the porch were 2 county sheriff vehicles. My property management trust had officially executed the eviction. The deputies had drilled out the heavy brass locks and replaced them. A small fraction of my parents' personal belongings had been hastily boxed up and stacked on the damp front lawn. I was told later that Brenda fell to her knees on the grass, screaming at the deputies, threatening to sue the city and demanding they arrest me for theft. But the deputies simply handed Calvin a copy of the county property records, proving I was the sole legal owner of the estate. They informed my parents that if they attempted to break a window or step foot on the porch, they would be arrested for criminal trespassing. Brenda and Calvin spent that first night huddled together in the back seat of Calvin's old sedan, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights of a 24-hour grocery store. Today, my parents live in a cramped, depressing one-bedroom apartment situated right next to a loud, elevated highway on the edge of town. There are no more lavish Sunday dinners. There are no more elegant church tea parties. Brenda is too humiliated to show her face in the affluent circles she used to dominate, knowing that every woman in her congregation saw the eviction notice with their own eyes. Calvin was forced to take a miserable retail job just to keep the electricity turned on. And Chloe, the daughter they had worshipped and funded at my expense, now sleeps on their lumpy living room sofa because she has absolutely nowhere else to go. They lost their golden child, they destroyed their own reputation, and they lost their home. 6 months have passed since that explosive night. The changing of the seasons brought a profound sense of peace to my life, and I decided it was time to resurrect a tradition on my own terms. It is a beautiful Sunday evening. The sun is just beginning to set over the sprawling grounds of the Crown Culinary Estate, casting a warm, golden glow across the manicured botanical gardens. I am hosting a Sunday dinner, but the setting is entirely different. We are seated in my massive outdoor dining pavilion under a canopy of glowing string lights. In the center of the pavilion is a magnificent, custom-built mahogany table that easily seats 24 people. I did not prepare a meal for ungrateful mouths tonight. I prepared an absolute masterpiece. The table is lined with silver platters of butter-poached lobster, truffle-infused risotto, perfectly seared Wagyu beef, and a vibrant array of organic vegetables harvested directly from my own gardens. The aroma of garlic, fresh herbs, and rich wine reductions fills the evening air. There is no one here to push their plate away. There is no one here to call my life's work inedible. Brenda, Calvin, Chloe, and Connor are nowhere to be seen. Instead, the seats are filled with my chosen family. At the far end of the table, Tyson, my towering head of security, is telling a story that has Julian, the boutique owner, laughing so hard he has to put down his wine glass. Evelyn, my brilliant and ruthless attorney, is passing a platter of roasted asparagus to Sarah, my loyal corporate receptionist. My team of incredibly talented sous chefs, the mentors who guided me through culinary school, and the true friends who supported me when I had nothing, are all gathered together. This is what a real family looks like. It is not defined by blood or obligation. It is defined by mutual respect, genuine support, and the shared joy of seeing each other succeed. I stand up from my chair at the head of the table. The lively conversation gradually softens as my guests turn their attention toward me. I pick up my crystal flute, filled with a vintage champagne that Connor could never afford, and hold it up toward the warm evening light. I look around at the smiling, radiant faces of the people who truly matter to me. I think back to the suffocating dining room of my childhood, the insults I endured, and the quiet, calculated steps I took to reclaim my own life. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, I say, my voice steady and filled with overwhelming gratitude. For a very long time, the people who were supposed to love me thought my worth was tied to how much disrespect I could swallow. They thought they were the main course, and I was just the scraps meant to be thrown away. I pause, letting the evening breeze rustle the leaves of the oak trees surrounding the pavilion. I look at Evelyn, who raises her glass slightly in acknowledgement, and then I look back at my loyal kitchen staff. But the thing about being a chef is, I continue, a deep, peaceful smile spreading across my face. You learn exactly how to turn up the heat, and you learn exactly when to take out the trash. The table erupts into cheers and warm laughter. Glasses clink together, ringing like tiny bells in the crisp night air. I take a sip of my champagne, sit back down in my chair, and let the beautiful sound of genuine happiness wash over me. The war is over, the house is clean, and the rest of my life is finally ready to be served. The most powerful lesson from this story is that your worth is never defined by how much disrespect you are willing to tolerate. We are often conditioned to believe that blood relations demand unconditional loyalty, even at the severe cost of our own mental and financial well-being. However, true family is built on mutual respect, not manipulation. Walking away from toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of profound self-preservation. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit into rooms where you are undervalued, you create the space to build your own table, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrate your success. If this story gave you the courage to finally set boundaries and protect your peace, hit the like button, subscribe, and share your own journey of building a chosen family in the comments below.